When humanity stood on the brink of extinction, it didn't just survive, it came back with fury. The Terran Supreme Fleet wiped the Krull Dominion from the stars, showing the galaxy what happens when you make humans angry. They didn't fight to win, they fought for vengeance, and every strike was justice for the fallen. But when the war ended, a new signal emerged from the void, ancient, alien, and clear: you have been seen. The war was only the beginning. What comes next is greater. Stay with us if you want to find out how the story ends, and don't forget to subscribe. The silence of space hung heavy over the shattered colony of Veos 3. Once a vibrant Terran settlement, it now lay crushed beneath the talons of the Krull Dominion. Their warships had blotted out the sun like an eclipse of death, and their warriors had swept through the cities with merciless efficiency. The cries for help that echoed across the stars were not born from hope, but desperation. The Terran Republic had never intervened in Outer Rim disputes. Veos 3 was far-flung, expendable, or so the Krull believed. Commander Varric, the reptilian overlord orchestrating the occupation, surveyed the last human survivors being herded like cattle. His forked tongue flicked with satisfaction. Pathetic, he hissed. No fight, no hope, no one coming. But as the last cries faded into the wind, the sky above Veos 3 changed. Not with storm clouds or smoke, but with something unnatural. The atmosphere rippled and tore open. A fleet emerged. Not just any fleet. Earth's Supreme Fleet. The flagship, Tyrant's Fall, led the formation, a leviathan of vengeance, its hull bristling with ancient fury. Behind it, dreadnoughts, war frigates, and carriers bore the unrelenting emblem of the Terran Republic. The Krull sneered. Another foolish attempt at resistance? But the moment their scanners picked up the incoming payloads, before warnings could be issued, they understood. This wasn't a rescue. This was retribution. The heavens shattered as Tyrant's Fall opened fire, vaporizing Krull battleships and searing beams of energy. Railguns fired in synchrony, cleaving through enemy hulls. Fighter squadrons descended like swarms of hornets, dancing between wreckage, carving through defenses. Krull formations faltered, comms channels flooded with screams and panic. Commander Varric watched in horror as his fleet, his empire, was reduced to scrap metal. He had heard tales of the Supreme Fleet. Whispers. Nightmares. But no story had ever prepared him for this. The Krull had crushed empires older than Earth. But Earth had never been like the others. Earth remembered. And Earth was angry. The battle for Veos 3, if it could even be called that, was over in minutes. The Krull were not beaten. They were annihilated. Predators turned to prey. Their flagship incinerated. Their warriors slaughtered mid-transmission. In the war room buried beneath the surface, Varric's claws dug into the command table as his officers shrieked into comms, begging for escape. There would be no reinforcements. No retreat. The humans had cut off every path. They came from Earth itself, one trembling officer gasped. Varric froze. That distance would take weeks. And yet, they did it in days. Warp technology. Faster than physics allowed. Built not for exploration, but for vengeance. Then the screen buzzed. A human appeared. Not just a soldier. A symbol. Grand Admiral Kale Drace, Supreme Commander of the Terran Republic's armed forces. Dressed in the black and gold uniform of war, silver hair pristine, eyes glacial and deadly. This is Grand Admiral Drace, he said. You invaded our colony. You murdered our citizens. You assumed we would do nothing. He paused. His gaze locked onto Varric. You were wrong. Varric slammed his fist against the table. You're interfering in Krull Dominion territory. Withdraw immediately or what? Drace's voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. It crushed every argument in Varric's throat. The Supreme Fleet doesn't negotiate, he said. We don't come to plead. We come to end you. You dare challenge us? Varric roared. We are an empire. We cannot be. Drace's gaze sharpened. This isn't about winning. This is about punishment. The transmission cut. A heartbeat later, the skies turned white. The planet shook. Orbital cannons roared, and the surface split apart. Krull cities turned to glass. War factories obliterated in flashes of light. Infrastructure disintegrated. It wasn't war. It was extermination. Varric stumbled, claws skittering across control panels, desperate to assess the damage. The holomap showed the truth. Entire battalions erased. Human shock troopers on the surface. Elite infantry carving a path through strongholds, their weapons designed not to subdue, but to destroy. The Krull were used to structure, to overwhelming formations. The Terrans moved like shadows, striking without pattern. Without mercy. A lieutenant burst into the room. Commander, orbital strikes have breached the lower sectors. They're coming here. Then the doors exploded. Smoke. Flash. Fire. Terran soldiers surged into the chamber, armor dark as obsidian, visors glowing red. Krull guards were cut down before they could react. Varric reached for his blade, but a shot struck his chest. He fell to his knees. When he looked up, the barrel of a Terran rifle met his gaze. Behind it stood Drace. You think killing me will stop the Dominion? Varric spat blood. You think we won't retaliate? Drace leaned in, voice like winter steel. Your Dominion is already lost. You. We never forget, Drace said, pulling the trigger. Silence returned to the war room. No cheers. No fanfare. just the thrum of justice fulfilled. Above, VO's 3 burned, but not beneath crawl banners. Terran warships hovered in silence, watching, waiting, ensuring the message was clear. Don't come for humanity, because humanity will come for you. The flames of retribution still danced across the bones of VO's 3. Crawl war machines lay shattered in smoking heaps. Buildings once twisted into command centers and torture dens now stood hollow and burning. And in the sky above, the Terran Supreme Fleet held its formation like judgment incarnate, casting long shadows over a world that had been reclaimed. Admiral Kale Drace stepped out of the shattered command bunker, his boots crunching against glass and ash. Around him, Terran soldiers moved with quiet, efficient purpose, securing the remnants, checking for traps, sweeping through debris-laced corridors. They didn't speak unless necessary. Victory didn't need words. Not here. Not today. Drace touched his comm unit. Status report. A comm voice answered, filtered through static. All crawl resistance neutralized. Surface cleared. Their fleet is gone. VO's 3 is under our control. Drace closed his eyes briefly and exhaled. It wasn't relief. Not really. But it was something close. And the civilians? We're sweeping the shelters now. Some injuries, some trauma, but they're alive, sir. We got here in time. That was what this was all for. The survivors emerged in stunned waves. Dust covered, wounded, their eyes wide with disbelief. They had survived bombardment, occupation, and systemic execution. Most of them had accepted death long before the sky had split open with the coming of the Terran fleet. The Crawl hadn't planned to conquer the colony, they had planned to erase it. Erase its people, its memory. But humanity had come, and humanity remembered. Grand Admiral Drace turned his gaze to the horizon where black smoke spiraled toward the clouds. VO's 3 had been a beacon once, a bastion of civilization on the outer rim. Now it was little more than a scar. Buildings crumbled, power grids fried, entire districts flattened. But it still stood, and in that survival was defiance. Captain Gia Reeves approached, her armor smeared with soot and blood. She stood at attention, rifle slung across her back, her expression unreadable but taut with something deep. The last of the Crawl are gone, she reported. No survivors. Med teams are treating civilians and organizing evac for the wounded. Drace gave a small nod. Casualties? Reeves hesitated. Over 200 of our troops. Colony losses. Severe. Around 70% of the population gone. Drace clenched his fists. The Crawl hadn't just wanted conquest. They had wanted to make an example. They executed the colony leadership, Reeves added. Broadcast the executions live. The rest were used for entertainment. Drace's jaw locked tight. He didn't need the details. He had seen what the Crawl did when they weren't challenged. And now the galaxy had seen what humanity did when it was. He turned back toward the skyline, where the last pockets of smoke drifted lazily in the upper winds. Somewhere out there, the remnants of Crawl Command had to be watching, listening, waiting for the Terrans to retreat, to leave with their wounded pride and go back into the dark. But they wouldn't. Not this time. This wasn't just about VO's 3, Drace said quietly. They think we'll stop here. They think this was vengeance. That will be satisfied. Reeves' brow furrowed. Then what's next? Drace didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for his command interface, patched into the fleet-wide channel, and issued a single order. All ships, prepare for immediate departure. VO's 3 is secure. But we are not finished. There was a pause, a beat of silence across the comms. Then one by one, acknowledgements lit up the interface. The ships of the Supreme Fleet responded in perfect unison, like a living thing. The Terran war drums began to beat. They had been silent for too long. Now they echoed across the stars. The Supreme Fleet pivoted with impossible precision, engines roaring as they cut through the void. Drace stood aboard the bridge of the TSF Invictus, watching the vast expanse of space unfold before them. Their next target was already chosen. Zartal 9, a fortress world deep in Crawl territory, a staging ground for invasions, a planet fortified by centuries of war engineering. No enemy had ever set foot on it. Drace intended to change that. The war room aboard the Invictus was alive with activity. Tactical officers projected real-time scans of Zartal 9, showing orbital batteries, war factories, and enormous citadels bristling with anti-ship defenses. Hundreds of thousands of Crawl troops were stationed across the planet's surface. Captain Reeves stood at his side, arms folded, her face grim. A frontal assault would be suicide, she said. We're not doing a frontal assault, Drace replied. He tapped a command and the map shifted, highlighting a mountain range near the planet's southern pole. This is their central control complex. All planetary shields, all orbital defenses, routed through this facility. We take it out, the rest collapses. Reeves arched an eyebrow. Heavily guarded. Suicide for a ground team. I'm leading it myself. The room fell silent. Eyes turned to him. No one spoke. Reeves stepped forward, her voice low. Sir, that's insane. You're the supreme commander of the fleet. You don't go boots on the ground. Not here. Drace met her eyes. This war is different. The Crawl think we fight from a distance because we're afraid. They think we hide behind ships. I intend to correct that. She stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. No protest. No argument. She understood. Orders rippled through the fleet. Dropships were prepped. Strike teams assembled. Stealth systems activated. An hour later, aboard a sleek, obsidian-colored dropship, Admiral Drace suited up. Armor sealed tight, weapons locked and charged. Around him sat the finest Terran operators, the best of the best. Battle-hardened veterans who had survived the impossible and made it look easy. No speeches. No last words. Only the cold embrace of the void and the promise of fire. The dropship surged forward, breaking through the darkness towards Zartal 9. The Kraul had believed their fortress world was untouchable. They were about to learn just how far humans would go when pushed. Zartal 9 loomed beneath the descending dropships like a colossus of stone and steel. Jagged ridgelines carved by ancient tectonics pierced the sky, and between them sprawled a grotesque fusion of Kraul architecture, brutal, black fortresses lined with glowing conduits of toxic green. The entire planet was a war machine, a planetary citadel pulsing with artificial life and built on the bones of dozens of enslaved worlds. The clouds parted in a roaring gust as the Terran strike force made its approach. Hidden by stealth fields and flares launched in distant quadrants, the dropships descended low and fast, straight toward the mountain-bound control facility. Inside the lead craft, Admiral Drace stood in silence, hands gripping the railing as the planet's surface streaked by beneath them. The strike team checked gear one last time. Armor sealed, rifles primed, sensors synchronized. Captain Reeves sat across from him, her eyes scanning through tactical readouts on her visor. We're entering the drop zone. Stealth holding. No sign we've been spotted. Drace gave a short nod. We only need 20 minutes. After that, even if the mission fails, the fleet will have what it needs. Reeves glanced up sharply. You're assuming we might not make it out. Drace didn't answer. He didn't have to. The hatch light turned red. 10 seconds. The hum of atmosphere against the hull grew into a screech. 5. Then green. The hatch blew open. Drace and his team launched into the void. Controlled falls from hundreds of meters up, their thruster packs kicking in with precision to guide their descent between jagged crags and narrow passes. Wind screamed past their visors, and in moments, they touched down. No sound, no light. Shadows in a storm. The terrain was hostile and raw. The Kraul had carved narrow paths through natural formations, filled with surveillance towers, sensor webs, and kill zones. But the Terrans moved like phantoms, darting through blind spots, deactivating nodes, leaving nothing behind. Minutes passed. Then the complex came into view. It was a fortress buried into the side of a mountain, a crawling hive of comms relays, shield regulators, and data cores. The structure radiated power. Above it, a glowing lattice shimmered faintly in the upper atmosphere. The planetary shield. Still active. Still strong. Reeves brought up a scan. Guard towers. Heat signatures. Dozens of sentries. Maybe more. Drace studied the map, then glanced at the sky. Time to draw their eyes elsewhere. He tapped a sequence into his wrist console. Seconds later, explosions erupted miles away as the fleet unleashed diversionary strikes on outposts surrounding Zartal 9. The ground trembled. Alarm klaxons began to wail. The Kraul took the bait. Sentries abandoned their towers. Drones were redirected. Patrols split and scattered. Drace raised his fist. Move. The team surged forward through the perimeter, slipping past failing sensors and distracted sentries. They planted charges at a key access point, a service conduit running beneath the main installation. The explosion ripped the gate open in a blaze of light. Terran boots thundered inside. Gunfire erupted. Kraul warriors, thick-scaled, clawed, and armored, poured into the corridors with plasma cannons and war axes. But the Terrans were faster, cleaner, more surgical. Hypervelocity rounds tore through armor. Drones were down with EMP bursts. Grenades bounced off bulkheads and burst with anti-organic flares, liquefying anything not shielded. The corridors narrowed. The resistance thickened. And still the strike team pressed forward. They reached the core chamber, a cathedral of control systems encased in concentric rings of circuitry and Kraul glyphs. Dozens of consoles ran along the walls, their interfaces a mesh of Kraul logic and stolen alien tech. At its center, the shield control terminal. Reeves rushed forward, pulling out a hybrid interface spike. Cover me. I'll need 2 minutes to crack the bypass. Drace turned just as the first wave hit. The Kraul had regrouped. Massive warriors armed with maulers and heavy rifles stormed into the chamber. The firefight exploded. Muzzle flashes lit up the room in staccato bursts. The shriek of plasma bolts ricocheted off alloy walls. Drace led the defense personally. His rifle barked out controlled bursts, each round finding its target. Throats, gaps in armor, exposed joints. Sergeant Voss, a mountain of muscle and reinforced exoplate, met the charge with a heavy repeater, mowing down a trio of crawls before they reached the center. Reeves cursed. They're rerouting security. We've got maybe a minute before reinforcements hit us again. Drace didn't hesitate. Hold the breach. Whatever comes through, hold. And then, the tremors. The floor shook with a heavier step. The light dimmed. The doorway behind the enemy forces split apart, and a warlord entered. It was twice the height of the others, reinforced with carbon ceramic plating. A war axe in one hand, an energy cannon on the other. Its eyes locked onto Drace. You trespass in the heart of the Dominion, human, it snarled. You will not leave alive. Drace stepped forward. I didn't come to leave. I came to end you. The warlord charged. Drace rolled aside, his rounds pinging off the beast's thick armor. It swung with terrifying force, its axe tearing through consoles and sending debris flying. Voss stepped in with a flanking barrage, drawing its attention, only to be swatted aside like a rag doll, his armor crushed. Drace didn't stop. He drew his blade, ducked under a wild swing, and slashed upward, carving through exposed tubing on the beast's abdomen. It roared, backhanded him into a pillar. Bones cracked. He staggered, spat blood, and raised his knife again. The warlord raised its cannon. Then a crack. A sniper round punched through its eye from the upper gantry. Lieutenant Harris, quiet, lethal, lowered her rifle and nodded. The warlord collapsed with a rumble. Reeves shouted, system overridden. The shield grids down. Outside, the stars lit up. The Supreme Fleet, waiting for the signal, unleashed hell. Orbital cannons descended with unstoppable fury, punching through the atmosphere like gods hurling thunder. Zardal 9's planetary defenses went dark in moments. No shields. No support. Just fire. The fleet reduced bunkers to rubble, where factories exploded into plumes of molten alloy. The fortress world, untouched for centuries, burned in under an hour. The Terrans didn't cheer. They didn't gloat. They observed. They finished. And they remembered. Because this was only the beginning. Zardal 9 was no longer a fortress. It was a graveyard. The ground heaved with distant explosions as the Terran fleet completed its final bombardment runs, vaporizing anything that still radiated crawl command signals. The blackened husks of once mighty citadels stood as broken monuments to a fallen empire, their spires toppled, their walls cracked open like skulls. Admiral Drace stood atop the ruined control station, the wind tugging at his battered armor, ash swirling in cyclonic eddies around him. Smoke plumes rose from the distance, some still burning, others already smoldering out. Below, his strike team moved through the wreckage, marking enemy dead, retrieving fallen comrades, and transmitting coordinates to medevac shuttles descending through the shattered atmosphere. Captain Reeves stepped up beside him, her rifle slung low, visor retracted. Her eyes were distant, her jaw tight. She hadn't spoken since the control override. Not even when the last orbital strike came down and the ground lit up like a second sun. Drace broke the silence. Report. She blinked once, then straightened. Surface defenses neutralized. All command nodes offline. Their fleet attempted a regroup at the edge of the system, but she hesitated, then allowed herself a grim nod. They didn't make it out. Drace exhaled slowly, letting the wind fill the silence. The Supreme Fleet had done the impossible. They had struck the heart of the Crawl Dominion and lived. And more importantly, made sure no one could ignore them again. Zardal 9 is ours, Reeves added, almost as if testing the weight of those words. The entire world. Drace looked up at the stars. They hadn't just taken the planet. They had taken the war to the enemy. A crackle erupted across the command net, a wideband signal, not from Terran channels, but from deep within Crawl territory. A transmission. Unencrypted, raw and filled with static. Then a voice snarled through the feed. You have sealed your fate, humans. It was a voice from the Crawl High Command, guttural, furious, desperate. You dare bring war to our sovereign worlds? You dare defile what we have built? This act of annihilation will be repaid 1,000-fold. You cannot comprehend the storm you've awakened. Drace didn't flinch. He activated his mic and responded in kind, his voice low, even, deadly calm. We comprehend it perfectly, he said. Do you? And he cut the channel. The comms went silent. The only answer was wind and flame. The fleet began recovery operations, but there was little to salvage. Zardal 9 hadn't just been crippled, it had been broken. Strategic data caches, cloning centers, training complexes, everything burned. The Terrans didn't take prisoners. They took proof. Proof that the Dominion bled like anyone else. Inside the TSEF Invictus, the War Council convened. Holograms shimmered to life, tactical overlays glowing in red and white across the table. Drace stood at the head, arms crossed behind his back. This was not a standalone operation, he said. The Crawl Dominion won't retreat. They'll regroup. Strike again. Harder. Fleet Admiral Hensley, patched in from the Star Blade, leaned into his projection. Their border worlds are already reinforcing. Our scouts report activity on CRY and Tar, Besh 7, and the Adrax corridor. If they weren't awake before, they are now. Captain Reeves gestured to a highlighted region on the galactic map. We cracked their security protocols on Zardal's mainframe before it burned. They had classified fallback positions, rally points, and potential invasion vectors against Terran colonies. They were preparing for a full incursion. VOS 3 was just the opening move. A murmur rippled across the room. Drace's voice cut through it. Then we move first. He gestured, and a dozen markers blinked to life across the map. Key military hubs, logistics nexuses, comm relays, each one a knife pointed at the Dominion's internal arteries. The Crawl spent decades cultivating fear. We turned that fear back on them. Hit fast. Hit hard. No time to regroup. No safe harbor. From this point forward, we don't defend. He tapped the console. We hunt. The commanders exchanged glances. No hesitation. No dissent. The war had changed. Humanity had changed. And the galaxy would never forget it. Far across the stars, within the obsidian halls of the Crawl High Council, chaos reigned. Warlords screeched in fury, slamming claws into data pads, arguing over chain of command and failed deployments. For centuries, they had ruled by power and fear. But now, their throne world echoed with doubt. News from Zardal 9 had spread like wildfire. Their invincible stronghold, gone. Vios 3, a massacre not of humans, but of Crawl. Humanity was not broken. Humanity was coming. One counselor hissed above the rest, his voice seething. We underestimated them. Again, this was not retaliation. This was a prelude. Another snarled. Their fleet shouldn't have been able to reach Zardal 9 without detection. Their speed, their tactics, their tech, it shouldn't exist. An elder commander growled. We have pushed them too far. They are not like the others. They fell silent. No one spoke the word aloud, but it echoed in every mind. Reckoning. The High Council would strike back. Yes, but the fear had begun. The fear they once instilled in others was now creeping into their own blood. And the Supreme Fleet was still out there. Watching. Waiting. Preparing to strike again. The T-7 Invictus cut through space like a blade drawn in silence. Around it, the rest of the Supreme Fleet moved in perfect formation, an armada of vengeance drifting at sublight across the edge of the Adrax corridor, the first of many Crawl territories flagged for eradication. Inside the warship's command deck, Grand Admiral Kale Drace stood motionless before a series of tactical holograms. Planetary grids, fleet signatures, and decoded transmissions flickered across the surface like war paint drawn across the stars. Captain Reeves approached quietly. She carried a fresh data tablet, recently pulled from the analysis core. They're bracing for us, she said, handing him the tablet. The Dominions issued emergency conscriptions across 3 sectors. Civilian transports been rerouted. Military stockpiles evacuated from exposed border moons. Drace glanced through the report. And their response fleet? Still scattered, Reeves replied. Our strikes hit them faster than they could regroup. They're pulling from deep space reserves, but it'll take time to consolidate. Days. Maybe more. Not enough time, Drace said. The corner of Reeves' mouth twitched into something that could almost be a smile. Not for them. Across the map, the next target glowed red. Besh 7. An industrial colony transformed into a weapons foundry. It fueled 3 sectors, produced armor and crawler frames for war beasts, and maintained dozens of Dominion frigates. And it was barely defended. The Dominion had never expected a retaliatory campaign so soon. Certainly not one this bold. This ruthless. Drace tapped the target. Wipe it. Planetary glassing? Reeves asked. No. This time we take it whole, he said. The Crawl rely on automated production centers. If we can seize and reconfigure their supply chains, we can turn their own infrastructure against them. Reeves raised an eyebrow. Occupy a Dominion world? He nodded. We burn what we must, but we build what we can control. The plan was unorthodox. Risky. Human war doctrine had rarely included occupation, especially this deep in hostile territory. But that was the old playbook. Drace wasn't following it anymore. Besh 7 turned on its axis slowly, a scorched orb ringed with endless lines of orbital conveyor chains and cylindrical refineries belching chemical fire. Beneath its clouds of ash and steel, the world never slept. The surface was dark with smog and alive with motion, millions of autonomous machines working ceaselessly to forge the instruments of Crawl dominance. And in its heart, a single command dome monitored it all. Drace watched the world spin from the Invictus Bridge as the fleet deployed. This time, there would be no stealth, no shadow operation, no surgical strike. This was a declaration. The first Terran dreadnought to descend on Besh 7 broke orbit with its cannons already firing. Shockwaves tore through orbital relay towers as one by one the automated chains snapped like brittle thread. Fire erupted across the sky. In minutes, the entire fleet followed. Terran drop pods streaked across the upper atmosphere like thunderbolts. Strike teams dove headfirst into enemy infrastructure, smashing power cores, rerouting processing nodes, converting magnetic rails mid-fire into launching pads for Terran assault frames. Crawl defenders tried to rally. Gubbeasts roared across bridgeways, and fortified turrets activated with bone-melting plasma. But the humans were already inside the machine. And the machine wasn't built to resist from within. Drace personally led the assault on the command dome. The storming team carved through automated drones and security protocols like they'd trained for it their whole lives. No one paused. No one hesitated. This was war at its most intimate, room by room, floor by floor. The inner chamber collapsed after 12 minutes of sustained breach pressure. A final, shivering rumble echoed as the dome's ceiling cracked open, letting in polluted starlight and the silhouettes of Terran warships above. The Dominion controller, a spindly crawl tech lord fused with the throne via neurochains, snarled in desperation as Reeves stepped forward, rifle leveled. "Don't," she warned. The creature shrieked, lunged, only for Drace to plant a boot into its chest and rip the neural spine from the control matrix with a wrench. The lights dimmed. The factory paused. And then restarted, under Terran protocol. Within hours, Besh 7's central foundry complex had been converted. Terran engineers rewired Dominion subroutines. Comm relays now broadcasted in Terran encryption. The planet's skies glowed with the light of refitted Terran transports taking off, carrying captured tech, intel caches, and strategic materials. But the real message wasn't in what was built. It was in who saw it. The attack had been live-streamed through hijacked Dominion channels. Civilian colonies. Frontier worlds. Even neutral systems received the signal. The Terran Republic wasn't hiding anymore. They weren't surviving. They were coming. On the Dominion's inner world of Krylex Prime, the Council of Flame convened in near panic. The chamber once filled with pride and ceremony now stank of fear. The humans have taken Besh 7, one hissed. Not destroyed, taken. They've seized a core world. Another pounded his claws into the stone dais. How did they bypass our orbital nets? The alarm systems were built for invasion, not infection, an elder said bitterly. The humans didn't invade. They rewrote the rules. They cannot be allowed to continue. They will, said a low voice from the shadows. A massive figure stepped forward, one who had remained silent through the proceedings. His scales were dull, scarred. His armor bore ancient war markings, symbols that hadn't been seen in centuries. High Executive Rail. The only Crawl commander ever to survive a loss to humanity during the pre-expansion border conflicts. He had been dismissed, demoted, forgotten. Until now. You let your pride blind you, Vrail growled. You thought they were prey. I told you they were fire. The others shifted uncomfortably. Vrail turned to the galactic map now bearing red streaks across Dominion territories. They will not stop, he said. They cannot be reasoned with. They do not conquer like us. They erase. One colony at a time. One world at a time. He drew a talon across the star map. They are not here to win a war. He looked up, and for the first time, the Dominion Council saw something new in his eyes. Respect. They're here to end it. The T-7 Invictus drifted in low orbit above Besh 7, its engines on standby, its cannons quiet for now. Within its reinforced command chamber, Admiral Kale Drace stood before a panoramic viewport, watching as reclaimed Dominion transport drones ferry containers loaded with strategic alloys and confiscated war tech up from the planet's surface. The operation had been a complete success, not just tactically, but symbolically. They hadn't just taken a crawl world. They had used it. Captain Reeves entered quietly, a fresh slate in hand. She moved with less urgency now, but with no less focus. Final figures from the reclamation, she said. We've rerouted the orbital conveyor chains. Foundry output has been diverted to our mobile shipyards. Within days, we'll have replacement armor for 2 entire divisions and components for at least 1 Dreadnought-class retrofit. Drace nodded. Losses. 72 dead. 19 wounded. All from the ground assault. That gave him pause. Besh 7 had been expected to cost them dearly. Instead, they had cracked it open like a rusted vault. Reeves hesitated, then added, we also recovered over 4,000 slaves. Mostly non-human species. Mining crews, forced labor. Status. Receiving medical. Some have already volunteered to assist. Drace turned toward her, brow raised. She nodded. They saw what we did. They saw who saved them. He turned back to the viewport, watching one of the dropships rise through the upper atmosphere, its Terran emblem scorched but proud. We'll need every ally we can get, he said. Because this is just the beginning. Across the stars, the Crawl Dominion flinched. Reports flooded in from every quadrant. Human fleets were appearing where they shouldn't be, far faster than any Dominion calculations allowed. They jumped through supposedly unstable warp corridors, bypassed hardened checkpoints, and cracked encrypted comm nets like they were reading open books. Dominion worlds fell like dominoes. Outposts vanished into silence. The Crawl's greatest strength, fear, was no longer theirs. Now it belonged to humanity. The Supreme Fleet's next targets were selected with precision: supply relays, communications nexuses, and Black Ops breeding worlds for Dominion war beasts. These were not battles. These were incisions. Each one calculated to sever a vein, to bleed the Dominion slow. Admiral Drace issued the new orders from the bridge of the Invictus, his tone calm, unrelenting. We will not pause. We will not give them time to adapt. They will not get their war, we will. And the fleet moved. The Terran assault strategy had shifted. No longer purely orbital. Now the campaign was a hybrid of shock strikes and deep sabotage. Terran operatives infiltrated Dominion labs, stealing prototypes. Cyber warfare teams rewrote targeting algorithms, causing crawl weapons to misfire or explode during testing. Worlds were turned against themselves before the first shot was fired. And with every victory, the story spread. The galaxy, once indifferent to the slow creep of Dominion conquest, now began to whisper new legends. Legends of Terran fleets that moved like shadows. of soldiers who fought like phantoms and killed like gods, of an admiral with eyes of ice and a voice that ended empires. Meanwhile, deep within the Dominion core sectors, fear gave birth to a different kind of power. High Executive Rail stood before a war council of his own, not the aging politicians of the High Council, but a cadre of hardened generals, survivors, and commanders from across the bleeding edges of Dominion territory. "These are not the same humans we underestimated," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "They're evolved, hardened, relentless." One of the warlords growled. "So we adapt. Bring in the Ascendant Guard. Accelerate Bioforge production. Release the Maulers. They'll be slaughtered," Rail snapped. "Thrown into a war we haven't even begun to understand." Silence settled again. He walked slowly around the room, claws clicking against the obsidian floor. The humans fight as one, not just with tactics, but with purpose. Every strike has meaning. Every death is paid for in vengeance. If we fight them as we fought before, we will lose. Another general bared his fangs. "So what would you have us do? Cede our systems? Run?" "No." Rail stopped and turned. "We evolve." He tapped a control node and a new image flared to life, a projection of a Terran colony world deep behind Republic lines. "Project Scorch." A whisper rolled through the room. "That's suicide," one muttered. "That," Rail growled, "is necessity." It wasn't a counterstrike. It was a message. If the Terrans were taking the war to the Dominion, then the Dominion would bring the fire to their heart. But they had already made a fatal miscalculation. They thought humanity had shown its full hand. They hadn't yet seen what happened when Earth bled. 3 days later, the colony world of Neris Prime went dark. One of the oldest outer settlements of the Republic. A place of scientists, families, civilian contractors. No military infrastructure. No defense grid. The Crawl didn't come to fight. They came to kill. And they did. Admiral Drace stood before the burning remains of Neris Prime, fist clenched behind his back, jaw set like stone. Medical teams worked in silence behind him. Survivors, those few who had made it to the underground shelters, sat wrapped in thermal blankets, their eyes hollow. "Over 100,000 dead," Reeves said softly beside him. "They didn't even attempt occupation. They just burned." Drace didn't speak. He didn't have to. The fires told the story for him. And in the orange glow of that horror, something inside him turned. From vengeance to resolve. "They want escalation," he said at last. "Let's give it to them." He turned away from the burning skyline and opened his comms. "All Terran fleets, priority override. Revoke containment protocols. Initiate Directive Iron Rain." Reeves stiffened. "Sir, Directive Iron Rain is—" "I know what it is." He looked at her, and in his gaze was the terrible clarity of a man who had seen too much and learned the final truth of war. "We offered the mercy at VOS 3. They didn't take it." He turned to the stars. "Now we burn everything." The stars themselves seemed to recoil as Directive Iron Rain swept across the fleet. It was the final page in the Terran Republic's war manual. A protocol so severe, it had only ever been theorized in war colleges, an apocalypse not of chaos, but of order. It meant unrestricted strikes. It meant annihilation as policy. It meant that mercy had been struck from the lexicon of the Terran war machine. The first signs came quietly. A Dominion listening post on the edge of the Kravari expanse blinked out of existence. No warnings, no readings. One moment it was monitoring deep space comms, the next it was a particle cloud. The sensor array on Railthex 5 recorded nothing but a silent distortion wave. Then came the full assaults. Fleet Group Thorn dropped onto Galec Station, a Dominion military haven built into the crust of a collapsing moon. It was protected by automated defense grids, drone squadrons, and planetary caliber railguns. None of it mattered. The Terran strike was so precise, so devastating, that survivors would later report the entire station didn't fall, it folded. As if the laws of physics had simply given up trying to keep it whole. Elsewhere, an artificial nursery world breeding thousands of Dominion shock troops was targeted not with bombs or bombardments, but with a planet-killer algorithm. Terran cyber warfare specialists hijacked the atmospheric control AI and flooded the terraforming systems with nanite replication errors. The soil turned to ash. The oceans boiled. The gestation tanks, lined with new crawl warriors, imploded, the pressure vacuum consuming the chambers in under 90 seconds. It wasn't war. It was methodical erasure. Admiral Drace stood aboard the command deck of the Invictus, his gaze hard as the reports came in. He didn't flinch at the casualty numbers. He didn't need to. There were none. These weren't battles. There were no Terran dead. Only crawl. Captain Reeves handed him the latest manifest. 14 targets hit in the last 30 hours. 0 resistance. The Dominion isn't even scrambling intercept fleets anymore. Because they don't know where we are, Drace replied. Because we're not where they think. Reeves glanced at him. Then where are we? Drace's answer was a whisper. Everywhere. That was the true genius of Iron Rain. It wasn't brute force, it was omnipresence. Humanity had mastered rapid-fold FTL lanes, obscure wormhole anomalies, and quantum prediction matrices. They no longer chased the enemy. They anticipated them. And they arrived before the Crawl even realized they were vulnerable. The Dominion had always fought like beasts, overwhelming, direct, brutal. But the Terrans now fought like ghosts. And ghosts didn't bleed. They haunted. Far from the war front, deep within the Dominion homeworld of HFY, a conclave of surviving high warlords and executors met in emergency session. The chamber was shrouded in layers of ritual and secrecy, but desperation had stripped the room of its grandeur. 14 military installations, gone, one barked. 16 strategic relays severed. Our forward colonies are collapsing into chaos. Another hissed, his voice shrill. We can't even find them. We don't see them until they strike, and when they strike, they leave nothing. I know, the elder roared, slamming a clawed fist against the war table. They all turned as Vrail entered. No escort, no announcement, just the slow, heavy tread of a warrior who no longer cared for politics. You let it come to this, he said. The eldest high executor glared. We gave you authority. And I used it, Vrail interrupted coldly. I told you they would not stop. And now the humans have torn through your borders like they were paper. You have nothing to bargain with. No high ground. No advantage. So what do you suggest? Another growled. That we kneel. No, Vrail said, stepping closer. I suggest we bleed them back. But not through force. Not through territory. He activated a small hollow projector, and a series of flickering images appeared. Human colonies, trade hubs, transit routes. Drace's fleet had been busy destroying Dominion assets. But Earth and its people remained exposed. I want a name, Vrail said. One that will make Drace hesitate. Just for a second. One of the counselors narrowed his eyes. You seek a political target? I seek a message, Vrail replied. You burn a colony, and they strike 10 of ours. But if you wound their soul, if you show them they are not untouchable. He let the words hang, and the chamber fell into a grim, unified silence. The Dominion, once fractured and panicking, found a common purpose. Revenge. Earth's moon caught the signal first. An unregistered ship passing through the shadow of Neptune, its signature fluctuating, mimicking old Terran diplomatic codes. It didn't respond to hails. Didn't deviate course. By the time the outpost at Saturn triangulated its drive signature, it was already past Mars. It wasn't firing. It wasn't speaking. It was just coming. Admiral Drace received the alert mid-briefing. A silent alarm flashed across his personal HUD, a code not seen since the early Exodus era. Origin breach. Trajectory. Earth. Unknown craft. His voice cut through the command channel like a blade. Redline protocol. Lock all orbital defense stations. Scramble Soul Guard. Engage K-7 planetary intercept grid. Sir, Reeves said, confused. A Dominion assault this deep? Why risk? They don't want Earth, Drace said. They want us to see them. And he was right. The ship never reached the atmosphere. It exploded just beyond the Karman line, intercepted by a rail cannon fired from Luna Base. But what it carried survived re-entry. Pods. Dozens of them. Each one crashing into the ocean, the deserts, the forests. And each one carrying a single corpse. Human. Tortured. Mutilated. Marked with the Dominion's crest and a message seared into their flesh. We remember, too. Drace stared at the reports in silence. And then he made a decision that would echo through the next 100 years of interstellar history. We're not hunting anymore, he said. We're ending this. He opened the master fleet control and issued the final command. Mobilize the entire Supreme Armada. We're going to VRH-Thal. The order rippled through Terran space like a psychic scream. Full mobilization. Every battle group, every war asset, every reserve fleet that had lain dormant was awakened. Stations once meant for contingency now roared to life. Factories operating at peacetime efficiency were overclocked to wartime burn. The vast network of human colonies, stretching across hundreds of systems, aligned their logistics as one unified machine. The Terran Republic had never moved like this before. Because this was not movement. This was judgment. Admiral Drace stood at the heart of it all. Aboard the T-7 Invictus, now flanked by the entirety of the Supreme Armada, he stared at the holomap that now displayed one destination, burning red at its center. VRH-Thal. The capital world of the Dominion. The seat of their empire. The heart of their pride. Intel confirms planetary defenses, Captain Reeves reported as she scrolled through intercepted crawl transmissions. 8 orbital ring fortresses. For planetary-scale artillery arrays. Over 200 confirmed fleet assets in system. Ground forces, estimates suggest millions. Doesn't matter, Drace said without turning. Reeves hesitated, then asked the question everyone on the bridge was afraid to ask. And what's our endgame, sir? What happens when we win? Drace turned slowly, his face carved from stone. There is no when, he said. Only because. The bridge fell into silence. He stepped forward, activated the main holoprojector, and opened the fleet-wide channel. His voice, now broadcasting to over 10,000 ships and billions of Terran citizens, was calm, steady, and final. This is Grand Admiral Kale Drace. You've fought without question, without hesitation. You've watched them take our colonies, our people, our worlds. And you answered not with fear, but with fire. You were told humanity wouldn't last, that we would fracture, that we would run. You've proven them wrong. Today, we go to the place they never thought we'd reach. We go to the world they believe untouchable. The cradle of the Dominion. He paused, and the next words were slow, deliberate, seared with wrath. Today, we end this war. The Kral High Council had prepared for many outcomes. They had prepared for rebellion. They had prepared for a prolonged insurgency. They had even prepared for a temporary retreat. They had not prepared for this. The sensors at the edge of the HFY system registered gravitational fluctuations days before the first human ship emerged. It was not one warp signature. It was hundreds, then thousands. And then it began. The sky tore open, and the Terran Supreme Armada arrived. Dreadnoughts the size of cities. Carriers that birthed swarms of strike craft. Weapon platforms pulled from myth and theory, now real and moving. And at its center, Tyrant's Fall, the very ship that had started it all above VOS 3, leading the charge like the point of a divine spear. The Dominion fleet scrambled to respond. Commanders shrieked into comms. Warlords barked conflicting orders. But the Terrans were already inside the system. Already calculating. Already firing. The first salvo came from orbital distance. Long-range rail cannons designed to punch holes in moons fired synchronized bursts at the ring fortresses. 2 were destroyed before they could power shields. The third returned fire, only to be overwhelmed by a barrage of antimatter torpedoes detonating in perfect formation. Dominion vessels surged forward, desperate to intercept, and collided with a wall of Terran fighters so thick they blotted out the stars. On the ground, chaos erupted. Cities once protected by the Dominion's arrogance now trembled under atmospheric penetration. Human dropships screamed down through anti-air fire, deploying legions of war-suited infantry, exoframes, and walking tanks powered by reactors older than the Dominion itself. Every landing zone became a massacre. Terran soldiers advanced like reapers, faceless, silent, unyielding. They didn't speak. They didn't stop. They only moved forward, one sector at a time, cleansing, erasing, ending. At the heart of VRRHThal's capital stood the Obsidian Citadel, a spire of black alloy that rose above the skyline like the fong of a god. Within it, the last of the High Council gathered for their final stand. High Executive Rail stood at the viewing platform, claws wrapped around the railing, watching the city burn. "Do you see them now?" he muttered, voice hollow. One of the younger counselors turned to him, trembling. "We must open negotiations. There must still be time." "There is no time," Vrail said, his voice like falling stone. A thunderclap rocked the tower. The roof caved in moments later. Terran shock troopers descended in controlled falls, black-armored shadows with eyes of fire. They landed amidst the chamber, rifles already raised. No demands. No ultimatums. Only judgment. Vrail turned to face them as Admiral Drace walked through the smoke. Not a soldier. Not a conqueror. A monument of vengeance. Vrail bared his fangs. "Even if you kill us, it won't bring your people back." Drace stared at him. "It's not about bringing them back." He stepped forward. "It's about making sure no one ever forgets why they died." Then he raised his sidearm and ended the last counselor of the Kral Dominion with a single shot. Within the hour, the Terran flag flew over VRHThal. Within the day, every known Dominion system went silent. And within the week, the Supreme Armada turned from the stars and began the journey home, its mission complete. But its legend had just begun. Because humanity had not just won the war. They had defined what it meant to be crossed. They had etched their vengeance into the bones of an empire. And from that day forward, every species in the galaxy would remember the truth whispered in the aftermath of fire. You don't make humanity angry. You survive it, if you're lucky. The war was over. But silence never follows conquest. It only masks the shifting tides beneath. VRHThal lay in ruins. The Obsidian Citadel had been gutted. The planetary defense grid was nothing more than melted scaffolding. Every war factory, every command spire, every planetary shield generator had been either dismantled or detonated. The Supreme Armada, having completed its final campaign, now began its long, slow return to Terran space. But there was no celebration, no parade, no songs of victory. Because humanity didn't fight for glory. They fought to survive. Admiral Drace sat alone in the central chamber of the TSEF Invictus, the stars stretching silently around him. Data feeds rolled across the transparent walls, updates from post-war cleanup teams, civilian recovery units, and galactic media channels now broadcasting endless footage of Dominion collapse. But none of it touched him. He stared out at the black, unblinking void, and wondered how many more monsters were hiding inside it. Captain Reeves entered quietly. She had removed her armor for the first time in weeks. Her expression was tired, but focused. "They've confirmed it," she said. "The Dominion is gone. Their core sectors are in chaos. Splinter fleets are disbanding. Most remaining Kral have gone into hiding or surrendered to local forces." Drace didn't look at her. "That's not the end." "No," she agreed. "But it's an end." She stepped closer. "You did what they said was impossible. You broke an empire that stood for centuries." "I didn't do it alone." "No," she said softly. "But you let it." There was a long pause. Then she added, "You should rest." Drace turned slowly, his face unreadable. "After the galaxy learns what happens when they come for us. Maybe." She almost smiled. Almost. But before the quiet could settle, the comms buzzed with a high-priority ping. Reeves turned and tapped her interface. Fleet Command? We weren't expecting transmission. The voice that answered came from Terra Prime, the Chancellor of the Republic herself. Admiral Drace, we've received reports from our deep space recon patrols. Something strange. Drace's brow furrowed. What kind of strange? Not Crawl. Not any of the known galactic factions. A signal. An automated beacon transmitting from outside mapped space. Drace stood. Coordinates. Reeves blinked. That's deep. Beyond even old Dominion borders. The beacon is using a code, the Chancellor continued. An ancient one. From the pre-expansion era. It originated from Earth's original deep colony program. A project that was believed lost. Drace's jaw tensed. Designation? The response came slowly. Colony ship Eidolon. Lost 117 years ago in the Omega Drift. He stared at the display, silent. No ship should have survived out there. Not for this long. And certainly not without contacting home. What's the signal say? He asked. Reeves pulled it up. One line. Repeating. Humanity is not alone. Within a week, the Supreme Armada was reorganized. Not for war, but for discovery. The front lines had moved. No longer directed inward, at defending humanity from the galaxy. Now, the eyes of Earth turned beyond. Scouts were dispatched along the Omega Drift. Drace stood once again on the bridge of the Invictus, this time not flanked by burning stars or smoldering battlefields, but by uncharted space. The kind of black no starlight pierced. The kind of black that remembered. Eidolon, Reeves said softly. No one's heard that name in over a century. Drace stared at the incoming signal. It pulsed like a heartbeat. Someone has. Beyond the edge of known space, something stirred. The beacon continued to transmit. And something else listened. Something that had once watched humanity from afar. Something that had waited. It had seen the fire humanity had unleashed upon the Dominion. It had witnessed the wrath carved across 100 worlds. And it had decided. Humanity was ready. The Tsef Invictus hovered at the very edge of existence. Beyond its bow stretched nothing, no stars, no signals, no light. Just the yawning black of the Omega Drift, an expanse that defied physics and swallowed centuries of exploration. A place where compasses spun, scanners failed, and return journeys became legend. And from deep within that void, the signal persisted. Humanity is not alone. Drace stood at the center of the bridge, every sensor attuned, every system on edge. The rest of the Supreme Armada had pulled back. This final stretch was flown by a single task group, the Invictus, the scout frigate Elysian Spear, and the science vessel Aurora Wake. Only those who volunteered remained, because no one knew what waited in the dark. Captain Reeves stared at the main screen, her voice low. Signal strength increasing. It's modulating. Language? Drace asked. Still Terran base code, but augmented, like it's been rewritten dozens of times over. Then the signal changed. The repeating line stopped. A new message formed. Welcome, children of Earth. The bridge fell silent. And then a pulse. A wave. Not electromagnetic. Not radiation. Something else. Something older. Reality shivered. The viewport dimmed, the starlight from behind them vanishing like it had been devoured. And from the void ahead, something emerged. It wasn't a ship. Not in the traditional sense. It was a structure, miles across, formed of shifting geometry and impossible architecture. Segments of it folded and unfolded like dimensions playing tricks on themselves. Lights pulsed through its surface. Not artificial, but organic. Alive. Reeves whispered. That's not Crawl. Not Dominion. Not anything in the archives. No, Drace murmured. This is before all that. A voice, not spoken, but felt, echoed across every speaker, every neural interface, every system aboard the fleet. We watched your fire. We watched your fury. You have survived the lesser crucibles. Now you are seen. Drace took a step forward, locking eyes with the incomprehensible mass before him. Who are you? He said. The voice answered. We are the architects. You call us myth. You trace our ruins in your oldest maps. You were not ready before. Now you carry war like a flame and memory like a blade. The crew around him listened in awe, unable to interrupt, unwilling to breathe. You have torn down an empire. But beyond the stars, greater empires stir. The galaxy is not what you believe, and your war has awakened them. The structure shifted again, folding, peeling open like the petals of a metal flower. Inside, a single object drifted forward, encased in gravity fields. It was a sphere, no larger than a human heart, but it pulsed with the power of a star. Take this. A gift. A key. A warning. If you rise, rise with eyes open. If you fall, fall knowing you were never alone. Drace stared into the glow and understood. This wasn't an end. It was invitation. 3 weeks later, the Invictus returned to Terran space. The Dominion was no more. Human worlds were stabilizing. The name Drace had become legend. But he said nothing of what he'd seen. Not yet. The artifact was sealed. Its energy signature suppressed. But even hidden, it called to them. Scientists called it a power source. Engineers called it a weapon. Philosophers called it a test. Drace? He didn't call it anything. He prepared. because he understood what the architects had shown him. The Dominion had ruled a quadrant, but the architects had mapped the galaxy. And somewhere out there, the others had heard humanity's roar, and they were watching, waiting, weighing. And one day, they would come, but they would find a species that had survived extermination, that had walked through fire, that had burned down an empire with its bare hands. And they would find out what happens when you make humanity angry, and they would never forget.